Welcome to Layer of the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another in my series of what I call milestone moments. These are moments in a band's career where everything seems to come together. It usually features the classic lineup of the band and has some of their most famous songs. So, the band that I've picked for today is Deep Purple and their 1972 album, Machine Head. This was released in 1972 on their own record label, Purple Records. It's the sixth studio album from Deep Purple. Now, that's not counting the live with orchestra album that they put out. Now, I could have done, and I may still do, their album Deep Purple in Rock. I certainly could have done a milestone moment on that. You've maybe heard me talk about in other videos how I consider the three most important and earliest albums in laying the blueprint for heavy metal were the first Black Sabbath album, Uriah Heep's first album, very heavy, very humble, and Deep Purple in Rock. So that album is a legendary album and genre-defining album in itself. But I went with Machine Head because for me, it sort of all comes together on Machine Head. The songs, the production. To me, this is really the Mach 2 lineup of Deep Purple, probably at the peak of their powers. And it has their most popular song on it, Smoke on the Water. So, like I said, this is the Mach 2 version of the band. You've got Ian Gillan on vocals, Ritchie Blackmore on guitar. If you've seen my favorite guitar player videos, you'll remember that Ritchie Blackmore is my #1 favorite guitar player. So Ian Gillan, Ritchie Blackmore, Ian Pace on drums, Roger Glover on bass, and John Lord on keyboards. It was produced by Martin Birch. The production on it is just fantastic. It's warm, it's full, it's got a nice bottom end. The bass sounds great, the guitar sound, everything sounds great on it. The drums sound fantastic. Ian Gillan is great. Just the whole thing, the whole production is fantastic. It's got a lot of punch to it. You can hear all the instruments. It's great. So some people probably already know the story. The most famous song on this record is Smoke on the Water. And Smoke on the Water was written about a fire at the Montrose Casino where Frank Zappa was playing. Somebody sets off a flare. The building goes up in flames. The guy who was the manager of the Montreux Jazz Festival, Claude Knobs, gets a reference in the song Smoke on the Water when they talk about him running in to save some kids. Now, Deep Purple was supposed to record at this casino. Apparently what they did was this casino would have concerts in the summer and then they would convert it into a studio. Frank Zappa was the last show that was supposed to be in there before Deep Purple moved in. The place goes up in flames. So they had to move their recording to somewhere else. And in the process, they get a song out of it, a legendary one at that, Smoke on the Water. But we'll get to more to Smoke on the Water here in a second. So the album starts with Highway Star. Just an absolutely amazing album opener. This is a song that Deep Purple and even Rainbow at times would open up their shows because it's just a classic opener. It's got that heavy metal, heavy rock, chugging type of thing. The organ sounds great in it. The lyrics are great. Ian Gillan, it's got all the trademark Ian Gillan stuff with the screams, like in the beginning of the song, those layered screams as it breaks into the verse. I especially love the guitar solos and keyboard solos in this. The keyboard solo is great. The guitar solo is one of Ritchie Blackmore's greatest, the way it builds into those fast runs that he does, and then the sort of harmonized parts, and it's got that chord progression that's very classical sounding. This is what I always loved about Ritchie Blackmore and John Lord and Deep Purple in general is they were a band that mixed in a lot of different things into their sound. They had blues influence type things. They had classical sounding things, like the guitar solo in this song has a real classical chord progression moving underneath it. And the song just builds great. It's got these sort of modulations in it where it changes key and everything. And it's just a fantastic song that comes ripping out of the gates and just drives straight through the whole thing. It's just a legendary hard rock heavy metal song. So next is Maybe I'm a Leo, which is I mentioned earlier, they also have a blues influence to their sound. And this to me is one of their takes on that here, but Purple always does interesting things with everything that they do. So even though this is kind of a blues based, that main riff, do da 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 do dun dun da da, they move it around. It like shifts around and boom, drops down, and then it moves up for the verse. And there's sort of these modulations and key changes. Ian Pace is just great on this whole record, but on this one especially, it stands out to me the way he just grooves on this. He's a drummer that I think doesn't get quite as much credit as he probably deserves. When people think of great 70s hard rock drummers, John Bonham is a guy that comes to everybody's mind, but to me, Ian Pace, he's kind of in that same category as Bonham. He has a great feel, great big sound. He can do technical stuff, but for me, he's way more of, he's got kind of a swing to his feel, and I think that Maybe I'm a Leo really shows that off. Pictures of Home starts off with that really cool, here we go, Ian Pace again, like drum fill that reminds me of Over the Mountain that Lee Kerslake would do on the song Over the Mountain on the Ozzy's Diary of a Madman, on the kind of fast drum thing. And then it kicks into, it has a little bit of a neoclassical feel to it, another metal-ish. You can hear how, I wouldn't consider Deep Purple to be a heavy metal band. If you go back to the very first video that I ever made, it was called 5 Classic Rock Bands that are often considered heavy metal that I believe are not. And I mentioned Deep Purple because I think they're much like Led Zeppelin. They do so many different things. To pigeonhole Deep Purple as just a heavy metal band, I think is wrong. But their influence on heavy metal is undeniable, and you see that in Highway Star is a very metal song with the chugging riffs, and Pictures of Home for me is the same thing. It's got these riffs in it, the climbing sort of guitar line that Blackmore plays, the lyric kind of subject matter. Leave me pictures of home. There's the layered harmony vocals from Ian Gillan, the way Ian Gillan uses his upper register in this. You can see how this would be influential on heavy metal bands and acts. Next is Never Before, which interestingly enough, the band thought this was going to be the big radio single, and it's a song that I like. I think it's really good, but when you think of this album, it's probably the deep cut on this record because everything else is so popular. Highway Star has been a concert staple for them forever. Maybe I'm a Leo, I've heard that on the radio. Smoke on the Water, of course, is a classic. Space Truckin', Lazy. And really, Never Before is maybe the deep cut on this, but this was a song that they thought was going to be the big breakout hit from the record. So I can see how they would think that. It's real melodic. It's pretty straightforward, a rocker. So it's a fun song. Next on side B, we have the legendary Smoke on the Water. That opening guitar riff is right up there with Iron Man or the intro to Stairway to Heaven as one of the most recognizable guitar riffs of all time. Ritchie Blackmore is a really interesting guitar player. He doesn't play kind of the standard guitar riffs that everybody else does. A lot of guitar players play what's called a power chord, where if you're not a guitar player, what that means is usually the root of the chord, the name of the chord, is the lowest note that you play. But Ritchie doesn't do that. He takes out that lower note and he plays just the top 2 notes. He sort of inverts it so that the name of the note chord is the top note. So he plays this 2-note thing that he plays, and that's what you hear at the beginning of Smoke on the Water, that riff. So he has a unique way of of playing his riffs. And then when the organ kicks in, it just gives. John Lord is just an amazing organ player, and his organ sounds so heavy. It's like an extra guitar there. You know, he cranks up that Leslie organ, and it just drives it really hard, so it gets that real grinding type of sound. There's an interesting video of him I saw where he's in the studio for this song that he did with Ian Gillan and Tony Iommi and Nico McBrain on drums, and you can see him fiddling with the organ. He's actually in the inside, you know, turning things to get that sound. He goes in and messes with the wires and the tubes and or whatever inside there to get that sort of overdriven driving sound of his organ, and that just adds to the heaviness. And the bass too, you know, Roger Glover is a guy that gets overshadowed a little bit because you've got Ian Gillan and Richie Blackmore and John Lord. But Roger Glover is great too, man. And when his bass kicks in on this boom, 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 it just sounds great. And there's a lot of great bass playing from Roger Glover on this whole record. Going back to Pictures of Home, there's a great spot where it's just him on the bass kind of walking up on the open string. He does a little bass solo in that. So that's really cool. Everybody in the band was great players, and they all shine at different moments on this record. So Smoke on the Water, what else can you say about that? It's one of the most classic, recognizable hard rock, heavy metal songs of all time. It's absolutely legendary. Lazy. Goes back to what I mentioned with Maybe I'm a Leo, where here's Deep Purple playing the blues, but again, they sort of twist it. They do different things with it. It just isn't your sort of standard stock blues thing. They take the blues, but they mix it up and move it around a little bit to sort of make it their own thing. And that classic Richie Blackmore, and here's again, it's the band. It has a swing feel to it. Deep Purple could play Highway Star, where it's really where it's real driving, really aggressive. They could and then they could lay back and like Lazy. It's a swing blues really, and it's just great solos from John Lord, from Richie Blackmore, and then for the last cut, they're back to the heavy rock / heavy metal, if you will, Space Truckin'. Another like riff thing here with the heavy organ and the ba-da, bam, 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 ba-da, ba-da, then jump, just great feel. They just lock in so tight. This is the days of analog recordings when bands went in, and what you're hearing is the band playing live. This is not computerized, cut and pasted, quantized. This is a band locking in and playing live and really capturing a great feel. And Space Truckin' totally has that. It's got a great groove to it. I love the spot where it sort of drops out in the middle and there's like some percussion like sound, and Ian Gillan's vocals, come on, let's go, Space Truckin'. His legendary metal screams, which really at that time, nobody was screaming like that. I mean, Robert Plant sang high, but Ian Gillan had those high-pitched screams that were so unique and totally his own, and he just sounds incredible on this. So there you go. For me, this is just a classic, legendary album. If you were ranking some of the greatest hard rock, heavy metal albums of all time, this would have to be in the top of everybody's lists. It's such an influential album. The band, in my opinion, at their peak. After this, the album Who Do We Think We Are? It's an album that I really like, but the cracks were starting to form between Ian Gillan and Richie Blackmore. And so although that album starts off really strong, I think it wanders a little bit on the second side. It loses focus a little bit. Here, they're totally dialed in. They're totally locked in. I think touring and everything after this would start to get to the band. And of course, Ian Gillan would eventually leave. Richie Blackmore would eventually leave, and the band would go through all these different members and stuff like that. But for me, this is the classic lineup era of the band, where they just had a chemistry between all of them. They all had a unique sound and a unique thing. You could pick out each member of Deep Purple, and they all contribute to the sound of the band. They're all very unique players, and you put them all together, and it's this unique thing. And the albums leading up to this are fantastic also. You know, Deep Purple and Rock, which I already mentioned, and Fireball are also fantastic records. So, all right, so there you go. Deep Purple, Machine Head. Let me know in the comments what you think of this amazing, amazing album. I have mentioned Ritchie Blackmore, my favorite guitar player. And if there's a place you want to start with Ritchie Blackmore, you couldn't go wrong with this. You've got his neoclassical type things like in Highway Star and Pictures of Home. You got his blues bass playing in Lazy. You got his classic riffs in Smoke on the Water. So there you go, Ritchie Blackmore. I love him. His playing on this is just great. I also always loved about Deep Purple is that, and this is going to show up in one of my legendary live albums. You know what I'm going to say here is Made in Japan. I always loved how Deep Purple took these songs and then they took them to another level when they played live. They improvised on them and they just took it to a whole nother place. So, but that's for another video. So let me know in the comments what you think of Machine Head. Make sure you hit subscribe and like, and until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.